Hey guys, Bearded Wonder here for another installment of the Cold War. And today I just want to talk a little bit about proxy wars. This isn't a required video, this is kind of bonus Cold Warrior content for those of you that just can't get enough of the Bearded Wonder. So here we go. So, talking about proxy wars. We've been talking about the Cold War, the Soviet Union against the United States. We've talked about, or you will learn about, the fact that both of them have nuclear weapons, and not just a few, but a lot. Enough that they can literally destroy each other, which is kind of a lose-lose situation for both countries. We don't really want that. So, the question is, how do these two big, powerful, nuclear loaded countries fight each other if they can't actually go to war with each other? And the answer is that we get into proxy wars. Basically, we've talked about this idea of containment. It's this kind of political philosophy that the Americans have, that they want to keep the Soviet Union from spreading. Obviously, that means that the Soviet Union's goal is to break that containment to spread to other places in the world. And so, where would these proxy wars take place? And we're just going to give a couple of examples of them. The first one is in Vietnam. Basically, Vietnam, you have communists in the south, or in the north rather. You have people who are not communists in the south. They're not really freedom lovers, but that doesn't matter as long as they're against communism. That's good enough for them. So, give them an uppercut there. Good old USA coming in, just going to teach them what's what. Well, since they're there, the Soviets have guns and weapons and other things like that, and the communists, not just the Soviets, the Chinese as well. But they can't actually risk that nuclear war, so they can't actually attack the Americans. So what they have to do is they just have to kind of give the weapons and the supplies to the communists in the north and just kind of root for them. Um, and so that's what happens, and that's kind of this proxy war. It's sort of the way that the Soviets are fighting against the Americans without actually fighting against the Americans. They're just helping the people fighting the Americans. Another example, this time the Soviet side is Afghanistan, and we'll have a separate video on the whole situation here. But basically, the Soviets go to make them to make them communist. And this guy named Osama bin Laden, dude, he really can't stand those communists. Really, he just hates anybody that's trying to mess with his mojo in Afghanistan, communists or whatever. And so the Americans make the mistake of giving him a bunch of cash and a bunch of weapons because, after all, he's not a communist. So yeah, he's going to take them. And the Americans just kind of give him all of these supplies and training and everything else like that. And of course, there's no way we're going to regret this later, right? Right? Oh, well, maybe we are. But at least we've learned our lesson from history, right? Like, okay, so proxy wars, maybe not the best thing in the world. Vietnam, not really a happy kind of war for America when we think about it. 58,000 people dead, turned communist anyway, and then we just gave that example there of Afghanistan and kind of the support that we gave to what becomes later Al Qaeda. And the Taliban actually end up jumping on the other side of that war after the Soviets quit. We jump on that team, and now we're fighting the people that we were helping before because they were fighting the communists. So we've learned that, right? Well, unfortunately, no. There's this guy named Bashar al-Assad. You can see him smiling there, all smug in the top left-hand corner. He just thinks he's all that. And he's running a country called Syria. He's not a good guy. So there's lots of Syrian people that are just kind of like revolting. You can see a couple of groups here. This is just kind of chanting, down with the government. Well, Assad has some friends called the Russians, and the Russians go in and they basically say, hey, we like Assad because he's going to help us out with a pipeline and some other things like that for the economy. So the Russians kind of sent their soldiers into Syria. They're there right now supporting Assad and his government against these groups like ISIS and also Syrian rebels. The problem is that the Americans decide that we don't really like Russia that much, and I guess dictatorship too. Although, if you look really closely at history, we're willing to tolerate dictatorship as long as there are friendly dictatorship to the Americans. And so we give a bunch of money and weapons and other things like that to all of the people in Syria. And that kind of includes, unfortunately for America, ISIS. We didn't know they were ISIS at the time. We just knew they didn't like Assad, and we figured that was good enough. And so we'd go ahead and do them a solid. And so, unfortunately, maybe we haven't learned our lesson from history, but basically that's a proxy war, this idea that you're in a war or you're supporting a side of a war, but you're not really fighting the people that you're fighting. You're kind of fighting them to get back at somebody else. It would be almost like beating up somebody's little brother because you're really mad at them, mainly because the little brother's easier to beat up. You could argue it makes you a coward, but also keeps you out of that mutually assured destruction thing, and that kind of sounds like a good idea. So I guess if you're going to get into a fight, you might as well at least pick one that you can win. So proxy wars, probably a bad idea. That's it for us today. I hope you have a good day.